Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck 219 and it's titled Tokens Multiplied. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card was suggested to us by Paul over on Discord, and that card is Lim-dul's Paladin. And Lim-dul's Paladin is 2 red-black for a 0/3 Paladin, and I'm going to do my best to read through this text box, so bear with me. It has Trample. During your upkeep, choose and discard a card from your hand or bury Lim-dul's Paladin and draw a card. If any creatures are assigned to block it, Lim-dul's Paladin gets +6/+3 until end of turn, and if Lim-dul's Paladin attacks and is not blocked, it deals no damage to defending player this turn, and that player loses 4 life. Effects that prevent or redirect damage cannot be used to counter this loss of life. So it's a little bit of an outdated text box, but essentially there's a couple of key things about this card that we really wanted to focus in on. The first is that in our upkeep, we either have to discard a card or sacrifice the Paladin and draw a card. And if it attacks and is not blocked, it deals 4 damage to the defending player. And if it is blocked, it becomes a 6/6. So with all of that in mind, we're going to move on to our commander and break down really what we're doing, what colors we're playing, and then break down the deck itself. So our commander this week is going to be the Master Multiplied. And the Master is 4 black-red for a 4/3 legendary creature Time Lord Rogue. It has Myriad. The legend rule doesn't apply to creature tokens you control, and triggered abilities you control can't cause you to sacrifice or exile creature tokens you control. So there's a very unique interaction between the Master Multiplied and Lim-dul's Paladin, where if we can make a token copy of the Paladin, it is now a token, and therefore triggered abilities we control can't cause us to sacrifice tokens. That means that we can actually choose the mode to sacrifice the Paladin in our upkeep, draw a card, but because of the Master, we won't actually sacrifice the Paladin. Now again, this only applies if the Paladin itself is already a token, so we do need to find a way to turn it into a token for that to work. However, that might give you a hint as to what we're really trying to do with this deck. So let's take a look at some of our themes, break down how this deck functions, and what we're really here to do. First up, we have clones. The best way that we can turn the Paladin into a token is to copy it with a red copy effect. And a good example of that is Flame Rush Rider, which is 4 and a red for a 3/3 human warrior. Whenever it attacks, create a token that's a copy of another target attacking creature and that's tapped and attacking. Then exile the token at the end of combat, and it also has dash for 2 red, so we can cast it, it'll gain haste, and it'll go back to our hand at the beginning of the next end step. Normally, if we create this kind of token, it is then exiled or sacrificed at the end of combat. Having the Master Multiplied means we actually keep that token and we keep the copy because, especially once we've already triggered the effect to sacrifice it, we're never going to have to be forced to sacrifice or exile it again, even if the Master is removed. So this is a great way for us to copy cards like Lim-dul's Paladin and put ourselves in a position where we can kind of exponentially grow our board and just keep copying things and keep going until we eventually run over our opponents. Moving on to our second theme of the deck, this one is going to be Myriad. Because Myriad is an effect that makes a token copy for each opponent whenever a creature attacks, and they would then get sacrificed at the end of combat, we can turn this into essentially a permanent token generation method with the Master, who himself has Myriad. So a good example of that is Elturel's Survivors, which is 3 and a red for a 0/4 Tiefling Peasant. It has Trample, Myriad, and as long as it's attacking, it gets +X+0, where X is the number of lands defending player controls. Most likely in a game of Commander, that means that it's getting +4 at a minimum. And if we're attacking each opponent with a 4/4 trample creature that has Myriad, we can probably deal at least a little bit of damage, but it's also going to be a difficult creature to kill. And the most important thing to remember about Myriad is that the token copy that it creates will also have Myriad because it has the exact same text box. So if we are not sacrificing our Myriad tokens to the Master Multiplied, each of those tokens continues to have Myriad. So on the next turn when we attack with the 4 copies of Elturel Survivors, each of them is going to trigger their Myriad, and each of them is going to make another 3 Elturel Survivors. So if we have the Master for just a couple of turns with a Myriad creature, we can get really out of hand really, really quickly. Moving on to our final theme of the deck, this one is going to be kind of damage-based effects. We need to have ways that we can win the game without combat damage. That is something that I have kind of learned the hard way in my time playing mostly red-based decks. We need things like Witty Roastmaster, which is 2 and a red for a 3/2 Devil Citizen, and it has Alliance, so whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. It's nice to assume that we can just kind of flood the board with creatures and win through combat damage, but there is a world in which someone has maybe a loop where they can keep getting back a Spore Frog, which, as we all know, is the worst card in the history of Magic, or any way to prevent us from doing combat damage. Witty Roastmaster means we don't actually have to do the combat damage, and if we get enough tokens, we can just do a ton of damage to each opponent, especially when we can start copying the Witty Roastmaster itself, because then each of them triggers independently. We're doing 2, 3, 4 damage every single time a creature enters, and that is a very quick way to win the game, even if combat itself isn't a possibility. So those are all of our themes for this week. And the next thing we're going to do is take a look at some of the key cards in the deck. These are cards that really synergize with what we're trying to do, and in some cases are win conditions or value pieces all on their own. So the very first key card that I want to highlight is going to be Kardur Doomscourge. This is 2 black and a red for a 4/3 legendary creature Demon Berserker. When it enters the battlefield, until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able, and attack a player other than you if able. Then, whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is incredibly important to our game plan because we need to make sure that we can attack with our tokens and our Myriad creatures. And if we can do that, then our opponents can obviously block. But with Kardur, we can force our opponents to attack and force them to attack someone who's not us, essentially opening up a lot more possibilities for our attack and being able to get in damage we may not have been able to otherwise. Plus, if we're being honest, a lot of our creatures will probably die in combat. That tends to be a bit of a downside for what we're trying to do. So Kardur being able to drain all of our opponents whenever one of our creatures dies is another way that we can kind of push through those last couple points of damage and put ourselves in a winning position. Moving on to our second key card. This one is going to be Mordor on the March. This is a card that I haven't played too much, but every time I have played it, it has overperformed. It is 3 black-red for a sorcery. Exile a creature card from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it. It gains haste until the end of turn. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. And of course, it has Storm. So if we cast, say, 2 or 3 spells before it, then we get to copy it 2 or 3 times. This can kind of let us reanimate our entire graveyard. And if we have the Master, we don't have to exile the tokens we create. We get to keep them, and it does quite literally just become a 5 mana mass reanimate, which is incredibly powerful and below rate. So while it's not the most efficient reanimation spell, it's still very powerful if we have our commander in play. If we don't have our commander in play, it does lose a little bit of that powerful ability, but it's still something that's worth considering. Finally, though, we get to our last key card, and this one is going to be Echoing Assault. An Echoing Assault is 4 and a red for an enchantment that says creature tokens you control have menace, and whenever you attack a player, choose target non-token creature that's attacking that player, create a token that's a copy of that creature except it's a 1/1, the token enters tapped and attacking that player, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So being able to give all of our creature tokens menace is incredibly powerful. We really want to lean pretty heavily on our tokens in this deck. So being able to give them some sort of evasion is a great way for us to push through the damage. But it's also a way to make more tokens, and yeah, it makes 1/1 tokens. But if we have something like, say, Cardor, then every single time we would make that token, even if it dies immediately, it's still going to trigger the enter the battlefield effect. And then with Cardor, we're then goading all of our opponent's creatures every single turn. And this is something that can, again, kind of put us in a position where we can just very easily win the game. So I think Echoing Assault, while it is a little bit expensive for a copy effect at 5 mana, it's still very powerful. Anyway, those are all of our key cards, and the next thing we're going to do is take a look at some cool interactions. These are cards that synergize really well with each other, and in a lot of cases are just kind of fun cards that I want to highlight because I think that they have some sort of interaction that deserves to be shown off. So, the very first cool interaction that I want to talk about is between Alexios, Deimos of Cosmos, and Helm of the Host. So Alexios is 3 and a red for a 4/4 legendary creature human berserker. It has trample, it attacks each combat if able, it can't be sacrificed, and it can't attack its owner. And at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player gains control of Alexios, untaps it, and puts a +1/+1 counter on it, then it gains haste until end of turn. This is one of those cards that is incredibly powerful because we can just kind of pass it around the table. Our opponents have to attack each other with it. It's going to keep getting bigger. But with Helm of the Host, we can actually make it even more powerful because Helm of the Host is 4 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary. That token gains haste, and it equips for 5. So if we have Alexios, we pass it around the table. Next turn, we can equip it with Helm of the Host. Now we make 2 Alexios. And it's worth noting that Helm of the Host will only trigger on combat on our turn, so our opponents will not get their own copies of Alexios. But if we have 2 copies, and then next turn we get 3, and then 4, it's going to very, very quickly whittle down the health of the rest of the table, because every single time Alexios gets transferred to another player, it gets bigger. So they would have, say, a 5/5 Alexios and a 4/4 and maybe a 6/6 and a 7/7. And since they can't attack us, it very, very quickly just ends games. So this is definitely something that is very mana intensive, but I think is very powerful nonetheless. Moving on to our second cool interaction. This one is between Twin Flame and Dual Caster Mage. Now, this is a combination of cards that I have used many times on the channel before. This is an infinite combo, so if that is not something you're interested in, then I would recommend removing probably the Dual Caster Mage, because that is what it's going to go infinite with the most easily. So, let's break down how this works, why it's relevant, and actually why both cards, even on their own, are still very good in this deck. So starting off with Twin Flame, which is 1 and a red for a sorcery, and it has Strive, so it costs 2 and a red more to cast for each target beyond the first. If we're being perfectly honest, that is irrelevant 99% of the time. The most important part, though, is choose any number of target creatures you control. For each of them, put a token that's a copy of that creature onto the battlefield. Those tokens have haste. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. So this is another very cheap way for us to generate tokens, and hopefully with the Master, not have to sacrifice those tokens. Where it goes infinite, though, is with Dual Caster Mage, which is 1 red for a 2/2 human wizard. It's got Flash. When it enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery. You may choose new targets for the copy. So the way that this would work is we cast Twin Flame, targeting any creature. It legitimately does not matter which one we choose. Then with it on the stack, we cast Dualcaster Mage to copy the Twin Flame. The second copy of Twin Flame will then target the Dualcaster Mage, creating a token copy of it when it resolves. The new token copy of Dualcaster Mage enters and still sees the original Twin Flame on the stack, being able to copy it again. This allows us to repeat this process an infinite number of times and create an infinite number of 2/2 Dualcaster Mages with haste. Granted, without the Master, they will be sacrificed at the end of turn, but in theory, an infinite amount of damage should win you the game, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Like I said earlier though, if you're not a fan of infinites, you can take out one of these cards, or to be perfectly honest, you can just kind of avoid the infinite combo because both of them are still very good cards. But that is something to keep in mind if your play group or just you is not a big fan of the infinite combos. So, finally, we get to the end of our deck tech, and the last thing we're going to have to do is talk a little bit about the price of the deck. So this week, the total deck price came in at $85.66, with the most expensive card being Molten Duplication at $17.87. Molten Duplication, 1 in a red for a sorcery, create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste until the end of turn, and sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Now, this is kind of just another copy spell, so it's a little bit strange to me that it's almost $18. But I was looking at the price of this entire deck and trying to figure out why the price of the deck actually spiked up recently. And so I looked back at some of the cards' histories, and when I built this deck, the Master Multiplied was only about 25 cents and is now close to $15. And it's almost entirely because of the new Deadpool Secret Lair that came out about a month ago, and it really spiked the prices of a lot of the cards in this deck. So I do apologize that some of these are significantly more expensive than when I started building the deck. It still shouldn't be too bad, but I do understand that there's been some fluctuations lately, so my prices might be a little bit off. If they are, I do apologize for that. With that being said though, if you do need to trim for budget purposes, you can very easily cut Molten Duplication. It doesn't do anything super special that some other cards in our deck don't do. Yes, it's 2 mana, which is very cheap to create a token copy of something, but it's not the be-all end-all of copy effects. We have plenty of others, so don't feel like you have to keep it in if you need to trim the budget. On the other hand, if you're looking for a card to put into the deck that's a little bit outside of our budget range, then I do have a suggestion for you there as well, because the card I would recommend putting in this week is Gold Lust Triad, and the card I would recommend taking out is Curse of the Restless Dead. Gold Lust Triad is 4 and a red for a 4/3 dragon with flying, and it has Myriad, which is a phenomenal ability for this deck. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. So in a normal deck, this would Myriad, you'd say hit 3 opponents, make 3 treasures. That's pretty powerful. But you would then have to sacrifice the tokens at the end of turn, so you'd have to Myriad next turn, and you would cap out at ever making 3 tokens. 3 treasure tokens at least. Then, with the Master Multiplied added on to that, we then keep the token copies. So we have the 4 copies that we make. We get to keep them for next turn. We attack, they all Myriad, so all 4 of them make 3 additional dragons, which is 12 total dragons. Those hopefully all hit our opponents, and we get to make 12 treasure tokens, which we can then sacrifice and probably just play out our entire hand. So Gold Lust Triad can get out of hand very, very quickly if allowed to. And I think because it's a 4/3 flyer, you're almost always going to have at least one opponent you could safely attack. And even if you can't deal the damage, you probably at least don't get the dragon killed. But if you're putting in a card, then of course you have to take out a card from the deck. And the card I would recommend taking out is Curse of the Restless Dead, which is 2 and a black for an enchantment or a curse. Enchant player. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under enchanted player's control, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Now, Decayed is one of those abilities that is a massive downside because that means the token creature can't block and it has to be sacrificed whenever it attacks. Now, because that is a triggered ability, we don't actually have to sacrifice the Decayed zombies if we have the Master Multiplied in play. And so if we put the curse on, say, a Lands Matter deck, we can probably get quite a few zombies over the course of the game. But if we're comparing, hopefully, getting a bunch of zombies to guaranteed getting a bunch of dragons, I do think the dragons kind of wins out, especially when the dragons also give us treasures. So I think that overall, the Gold Lust Triad is going to be much more powerful in the deck than the Curse of the Restless Dead, but it's by no means a bad card if you can't squeeze in the Triad for budget purposes. That, though, is the end of our deck tech, and the very last thing we're obviously going to have to do is see how this deck performs in a game. But before we get to that, I do want to take a second to shout out some of our patrons and channel members. Just a massive thank you goes out to everyone who has helped support the channel. If you would like to support the channel, you can find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, or right here on YouTube as a channel member. That link is in the description of the video. And if neither of those are your thing, or maybe it's just not the time for you, I completely understand. You can always just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit as well. But like I said, if you want to go a little bit above and beyond, you can get access to our Discord channel where we brew up a lot of the decks and also play the games that appear on the channel. The unedited gameplay videos, you can get cards sent to you every single month as a thank you, or even a proxied out version of the decks that I have built for this channel, because sometimes you just gotta try stuff out before you buy it. So if that's interesting to you, please do check us out. But before we get into the game, I do have one last quick shout out that I want to give. If you are interested in signing up for the Patreon, I have been sending out personalized tokens to go along with all of the cards. I know they're gorgeous. I'm an amazing artist, I understand. So if you would like some of these amazing pieces of artwork to adorn your own playmats, then of course check us out on the Patreon or right here on YouTube as a channel member. But now that all the self-plugs are out of the way, let's check out our opponents for this week and find out how we can do in a game. So, our opponents are Doodle, playing Lord Magnus. We have Jason, playing Rebek, Architect of Ascension, and Silas Wren, Seeker Adept. And we have Bilal, playing Gilwain, Casting Director. So, Doodle's Lord Magnus deck. This is a first strike deck, which I think is very unique. This deck showed up, I believe, last week, so if you haven't seen that game, do go check it out. But Lord Magnus is a very cool creature because it kind of, as weird as it sounds, doesn't do too much, but I feel like what it does do is kind of throw your opponents off. Being able to give things first strike, or I guess give itself first strike, and have creatures with Planeswalk and Forest Walk be blocked is most likely not going to be relevant. But it's still kind of cool to be such a unique commander that you really don't see very often. And I think that the first strike idea to build around is super cool because it's kind of an underrated kind of ability, but still very fun. Moving on to Jason and his Silas Wren and Rebek deck. This is exactly what you would expect from Silas Wren and Rebek. This is artifacts. This is something that Jason is very well accustomed to. He's very skilled at building artifact decks. So I think that if I had to pick one of these opponents to be the most concerned about, it's definitely Jason and the artifacts, mainly because he, like I said, is very good with artifacts, but he's also very good at playing blue, black, and white. I think it's just kind of a combination of a lot of his favorite colors. So this is a kind of an amalgamation of everything that Jason wants to be doing, and probably doing it very well. So with Silas Wren and, like I mentioned, Rebek, this is definitely a deck to watch out for. And last but not least, we have Bilal playing Gilwain, and we've seen Gilwain a couple of times on the channel before, but not from Bilal specifically. So being able to create a ton of auras is kind of his goal here. He wants to be able to just flood the board with creatures that have a ton of relevant abilities, give them some rolls, benefit from some enchantress effects and aura benefits. And I think that this is also a very scary deck at the table. But like I said, if I had to pick a deck to be the most concerned about, I think it's definitely the artifacts. So let me know what you think down in the comments, which deck you think is going to walk out the winner this week. make sure you get those predictions in. But thank you all so much for watching so far. Let's jump into this game, see how we do, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Doodle goes first, followed by Jason, myself, and then Bilal. On Doodle's first turn, he plays a Radiant Grove. Jason plays an Island, casts a Soul Ring, and then uses that to cast an Orzhov Signet. I play a Mountain. Bilal plays a Razor Verge Thicket. Doodle plays a Plains. Jason plays a Plains and casts Psy Master Thopterist, making a 1/1 Thopter token whenever he casts an artifact spell. Then he casts Silvermere, making a Thopter. On my turn, I play a Swamp and cast Rakdos Signet. Bilal plays a Plains and casts Kenrith's Transformation, enchanting Psy, turning him into a 3/3 elk with no abilities. Doodle plays a Gavany Township, then casts Lauren of the Third Path, destroying Jason's Soul Ring when she enters. Jason casts his commander, Silas Wren Seeker Adept, which allows him to cast an artifact from his graveyard when it deals combat damage to an opponent. After that, Jason attacks Bilal for 3 with the Elk. On my turn, I play a Scavenger Grounds and cast a Sandstorm Crasher, which can be exerted when it attacks to create a tapped and attacking token copy of another target creature I control, sacrificing the token at the end of turn. Bilal plays a Forest and casts Tanglespan Lookout, now drawing a card whenever an aura enters under his control. Doodle plays a Forest. Jason plays a Swamp and attacks me for 2 with Silas Wren, letting him cast the Soul Ring from his graveyard in his second main phase. He then also casts Azorius Signet and the Might Stone and Weak Stone, drawing 2 cards when it enters. On my turn, I play a Swamp and cast Agitator Ant before moving to combat and attacking Bilal for 3 with the Sandstorm Crasher, exerting it to make a tapped and attacking copy of the Agitator Ant, which is also attacking Bilal for 2. He blocks the copy of the Ant with the Lookout, but before damage, Doodle flashes in Sigrid Godfavored, exiling the Lookout since it's now blocking. This means that Bilal takes 3, and I moved my end step, triggering both Ants, letting each player put 2 instances of 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control, but goading any creature that has counters put on them. I put 2 counters on the real Ant and the Crasher, Doodle puts 4 counters on Sigrid, and Jason puts 4 counters on his Thopter. Finally, I'm forced to sacrifice the copy of the Ant token and pass. Bilal plays a Hall of Heliod's Generosity and casts his commander Gilwain Casting Director, now letting him put his choice of a royal, sorcerer, or monster roll on any non-token creature that enters under his control. When Gilwain enters, Bilal chooses to put a royal roll on him, giving him +1/+1 and ward 1. Doodle plays a Bala Ged Sanctuary and casts Always Watching, giving his non-token creatures +1/+1 in Vigilance, then attacks Jason with Sigrid for 7, but it's blocked by the Elk, killing it while Jason takes no damage. On Jason's turn, he casts Voyager Quickwelder, making his artifact spells cost 1 less to cast. After that, he moves to combat, attacking Doodle for 5 with his Thopter. Then, in his second main phase, Jason casts Monumental Corruption, drawing 7 cards and losing 7 life, since he controls 7 artifacts. Once that's resolved, he plays a Plains, casts a Mere Convert, and then passes. On my turn, to try to curry some favor, Doodle activates Lauren, tapping her so that both he and I get to draw a card. I then play a Swamp and cast Witty Roastmaster, doing 1 damage to each opponent whenever a creature enters under my control. Then I also cast Urabrask's Forge and move to combat, triggering the forge so it gets an oil counter, and I make an X1 Phyrexian Horror token with haste, where X is the number of oil counters on the forge, but I do have to sacrifice the token at the end of turn. This turn, I make a 1/1 Horror, do 1 damage each opponent, then use it to attack Jason, but he easily blocks with his Quick Welder, killing the Horror. Finally, at the end of turn, Agitator Ant triggers, so I put 2 +1/+1 counters on Witty Roastmaster, Bilal puts 2 counters on Gilwain, Doodle puts 2 counters on Sigrid, and Jason puts 2 counters on his Thopter. On Bilal's turn, he moves straight to combat, attacking Jason for 5 with Gilwain, then in his second main phase, casts Shalai Voice of Plenty, giving himself and his other creatures hexproof, and she also enters with a Royal Roll. Doodle plays a Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, turning all lands into forests in addition to their other types. He casts Dryad of the Elysian Grove, turning all his lands into every basic land type, and letting him play an additional land on each of his turns. He then attacks Bilal for 9 with Sigrid, then in his second main phase, Doodle casts Knight of the White Orchid, not searching his library for a plains since no opponents control more lands than he does. Jason casts Bident of Thassa, letting him draw a card whenever a creature he controls deals combat damage to an opponent. This lets him attack Doodle for 7 with a Thopter, drawing a card when it deals damage. Then in his second main phase, Jason casts Urza Chief Artificer, giving his artifact creatures Menace and creating a 0/0 construct token that gets +1/+1 for each artifact he controls when he moves to his end step. Finally, he plays a Dimir Aqueduct, returning a plains to his hand, and makes a 10/10 construct token. I play a Swamp and cast my commander, the Master Multiplied, now preventing the legend rule from applying to creature tokens I control, and preventing triggered abilities I control from causing me to sacrifice or exile creature tokens. This does 1 damage each of my opponents. Then when I move to combat, I put an oil counter on the forge, make a 2/1 Horror token, doing 1 damage each opponent, before attacking Bilal with the Crasher for 5, exerting it to make a token copy of the Master that's also tapped and attacking him for 4, doing 1 damage to each opponent. Unfortunately, I forget that Bilal's Shalai is getting +1/+1 from the Royal Roll, meaning Bilal can easily block the copy of the Master, killing it and only taking 5. At the end of turn, Agitator Ant triggers, so I put 2 +1/+1 counters on the Master, Bilal puts 2 counters on Shalai, Doodle puts 2 counters on the Knight of the White Orchid, and Jason puts 2 counters on his Thopter. Bilal plays a Forest and casts Satyr Enchanter, entering with a Royal Roll and now letting him draw a card whenever he casts an enchantment. After that, he cast All That Glitters, enchanting Shalai, drawing a card, giving her +1/+1 for each artifact and enchantment he controls, which is currently 4. This lets him attack Jason with Shalai for 11 total damage. Then at the end of turn, Doodle activates Lauren, letting himself and Jason draw a card. Doodle plays both a Myriad Landscape and Path of Ancestry, then attacks me for 9 with Sigrid, and attacks Bilal for 5 with Knight of the White Orchid. Bilal blocks with Gilwain, not killing either creature, while I block with my Phyrexian Horror, killing it. Jason casts his other commander, Rebek, Architect of Ascension, giving artifacts he controls protection from each mana value among artifacts he controls, which is currently 0 through 5. Then he casts Noxious Gearhulk, destroying the Master when it enters, and letting Jason gain 5 life since the destroyed creature had 5 toughness. Notably, I do choose to put my commander into the graveyard instead of the command zone. After that, Jason moves to combat, attacking Bilal for 8 with his Thopter, drawing a card, and attacks me for 10 with his Construct, but I block with my 2 remaining creatures, killing them both and preventing me from taking any damage. Finally, at the end of turn, Jason creates another Construct. On my turn though, I immediately cast Blasphemous Act, doing 13 damage to each creature. Jason has a response, casting Unbreakable Formation to give all his creatures indestructible, allowing them to survive the board wipe. Doodle also has a response, casting Generous Gift to destroy Jason's Urza before it becomes indestructible, and giving him a 3/3 elephant token instead. Still in response, Doodle activates Lauren to let himself and Bilal draw a card, which notably he couldn't have done at the time since Shalai was giving Bilal hexproof. Then the board wipe resolves, with Jason keeping his board and Bilal getting his Tanglespan Lookout back. Once all of that has resolved, I cast Mordor on the March, copying it once since it has Storm, and exiling 2 creatures from my graveyard, creating token copies of them, giving them haste, then exiling the tokens at the next end step. This lets me create token copies of the Master Multiplied and Sandstorm Crasher. Notably, there were 3 spells cast this turn, not just 1, so I should have also copied this spell 2 more times. Before I can move to combat though, Jason casts Swords to Plowshares, exiling the Master and gaining me 4 life since it had 4 power. Then when I move to combat, I make a 3/1 Horror token and attack Doodle with my creatures for 9 since I can exert the Crasher to copy the Horror before they're both exiled at the end of turn. On Bilal's turn, he casts Shielded by Faith, enchanting Tanglespan Lookout, drawing a card and giving it indestructible. Doodle casts Surak and Goreclaw, giving his creatures haste, trample, and putting a +1/+1 counter on any creature that enters under his control. After that, he casts Elite Inquisitor, entering with a +1/+1 counter, and uses it to attack me for 4. On Jason's turn, he cast March of Progress Overloaded, creating a token copy of each artifact creature he controls. While the only Noxious Gearhulk has a relevant ability, destroying Surak and Goreclaw when it enters and letting Jason gain 5 life, it also turns his constructs into 20 power creatures. This allows him to move to combat, attacking me with both constructs for 40 damage, attacking Bilal for 9 with a Thopter, and he attacks Doodle with the rest of his board for 12. While Doodle would survive the attack, he knows he doesn't have anything that can get him out of this situation, so he decides to concede, winning Jason the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. We definitely did quite a bit with our tokens, which I was very happy about. Definitely a misplay on my part with the Mordor on the March not getting all of the storm triggers, but I still think it was a very good showing for the Master. I think that if we'd been able to successfully wipe the board and then hit that Mordor on the March, I think we would have been in a much better position and probably could have won the game. But Jason having that protection from the board wipe really just kind of wrapped things up for him, put himself in a position where the rest of us really couldn't do anything, so it was a very sweet way to end the game. Bilal unfortunately got a little bit stuck on mana in the early game and kept trying to deploy threats, but they kind of kept getting caught up in everything else that was going on. So not a great showing from Gilwain, but sometimes getting stuck on lands will do that to you. Doodle's deck, though, did very well. I think he did a great job of sticking 1 or 2 big threats, that Sigrid especially, which I don't think I've ever seen someone cast a Sigrid in Commander before, so that was very cool. And I think it's one of those decks that is only going to get better with time, because they're definitely going to keep printing First Strike cards and maybe eventually have some First Strike themes, and there's definitely going to be something busted that comes out for that deck eventually. And then, finally, last but not least, our winner, Jason. Congratulations to our winner. Like I mentioned, definitely benefited from protecting his board, but I think he had built just such an engine of artifacts and just continuously was pumping out value and drawing cards and making tokens that even the rest of us really taking him down together couldn't be done. It was something that he played the archenemy very well. He put himself in a position where he forced the board wipe and could protect against it. And he, even if the board wipe had happened, had put himself in a position to recover from it. So a very impressive showing from Jason. Like I said, artifacts, definitely one of his things. So very, very cool game. I had a ton of fun. Let me know down in the comments if there's any cards you'd like to see me build around in the future. I love seeing all of the suggestions and building all the decks. So with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching. Please do like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.